Hi, this is Moriah Stonehocker, and my presentation is about Hockett's 7 principles and Chomsky's universal grammar. So I first want to talk about Hockett's 7 properties of language that set human language apart from animal language with these properties. The first is duality of patterning that all humans share, as they have a large stock of sound bites or units that they can pull from, but these sounds have no meaning in isolation. They only have meaning when combined together to form words. For example, the sounds d, g mean nothing in isolation, but when combined into dog, they have a meaning in our language. In animals, they have a small repertoire of sounds or signals they can produce, and these signals mean one thing. Secondly, productivity. Animals can only talk about immediate survival, reproduction, and other limited topics. Humans, on the other hand, can produce new sentences and make up new topics all the time. Animals are limited in what they can talk about and what they will talk about, whereas humans can invent new sentences and pull together new things. For example, when asked, "How are you?" a person can respond one day, "I'm doing horrible," and the next they can say, "I'm doing all right." And they aren't limited to what they can say or what they can't say. Third is arbitrariness. In animals, there is often a strong recognizable link between the sound that is produced and the message that that sound conveys. For example, when my dog barks, one bark could mean, "Get off my lawn." Another bark can mean, "I'm happy to see you." Those barks mean what they sound like. On the other hand, with humans, when I say something like pineapple, that sound doesn't necessarily equate to a pineapple. Also, in other human languages, there are other names for that fruit. For example, in French, l'ananas isn't the same as pineapple. We have found, as humans, other ways of describing objects that do have nothing to do with the object themselves. Next, we have interchangeability. And in a nutshell, this means as humans, we can be copycats, or there's role exchanges. Anything that another human says in the language I know, I theoretically should be able to reproduce it. This is not the same in animals that have different signals, body parts, feather colors in their communication as males and females. For example, male birds of paradise have very colorful feathers and rituals that are involved in their courtship and mating that females do not have and cannot produce. Number 5 is specialization. And this is kind of complicated, but it states that an act cannot be communicative unless it involves triggering. And then the other part of it, there's 2 parts. Any act merely as physical activity has energetic consequences. So if a trigger has an energetic consequence that correlates, it's unspecialized. But if these 2 things, if the trigger equates energetic consequences that don't match up, then it's specialized. For example, when a toddler is told, "Go into timeout, you've done wrong, go into timeout," and the toddler is triggered and responds by crying and saying no and throwing a fit, the words that were communicated did not necessarily have a direct triggering effect to the toddler in a physical way. For example, the temperature wasn't raised, a hormone wasn't reproduced in order to make the child respond in that way. Although the trigger when a trigger is indirect in that communication style, then it is considered specialization. Displacement states that humans can talk about things that are not there. We can also talk about things that are imaginary in the past or completely fictitious. Animals, on the other hand, can only talk about things that are in the here and now and that are concrete. Bees are one of the only exceptions that can use their dances to talk about where honey is, or where nectar is, that they can go and then come and produce the honey, but no other animal is seen to be able to talk about things that aren't there in the immediate space. Cultural transmission states that language is learned and taught, And we're not born knowing a certain language. However, we are biologically inclined to learn one, or rather we're wired to. Another example with my dog is that dogs are born knowing how to bark and wag their tails. Even in isolation, they know how to do these things. It's innate within them when they're born. Humans, on the other hand, have to learn language over time. But as I said, we are biologically inclined to learn language. And this brings me to universal grammar. Universal grammar was a theory put forth by Noam Chomsky, and two of the basic principles that come from it is that babies go through the same developmental stages no matter the language. A child learning Farsi, a child learning French, a child learning English, Dutch, Danish, whatever language, they go through the same developmental stages in proficiency and as they grow. This shows that there's something across humans that is the same, that they are biologically wired to learn language. The second principle is that infants master language way faster than if they were just blank slates. This also shows that we are biologically programmed to learn language. This is seen as certain mistakes are never made by children learning a new language. They are very quick to pick up on structure, sound pairings, and this brings us to morphemes. Here's a morpheme. This has to do with arbitrariness, that the smallest parts of the word that in isolation mean nothing, to a certain extent in some morphemes, must be combined to make word sounds. Children learn from an early age to pick apart morphemes and understand words, how words ought to sound, how words ought to be structured. This can be seen by looking at two different kinds of morphemes. There is free and there is bound. Free morphemes sound exactly what they should sound like. Or rather, they sound as something they should be free, they can be by themselves. For example, we have boy, food, door. Those are all free, they can stand alone. Bound morphemes cannot stand alone. For example, endings like er and ed, and id. In English, those don't mean anything unless they are paired with a free morpheme. The example I had that pairs them together is tickler. Tickle, by itself, is a word. It has meaning. But the other part of it, does not have meaning. So these two combined put the person or the person who is tickling and then the verb or the action that they're doing. And that is the end of my video. I would like just to say thank you to my dog and thank you for listening.